Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. Happy to be here. Yeah, we have a couple great questions we're going to work on today, or maybe just one.
Well, one for today, but to be honest, we're batch recording here.
There you go.
I keep hearing how batching is just the productivity hack of the world.
We appreciate these questions, but what's new? What have you been writing? Great new articles, or what have you been doing?
Well, right now I'm just very, very tired. We are recording this early, so it's Saturday, and I just did my long run, getting ready to do a night run with a friend. So frankly, all systems are not go. All systems are pretty low right now. But no, I mean, long run was great. Feeling good and psyched on that. But nonetheless, 3 hours on trails.
Okay.
Still
well,
3 hours on trails.
Mountain bikes with some young mountain bike rippers, young athletes, and you beat us. We had a 3-hour session, and you got your run done in under 3 hours. So
take that.
There you go. You're moving.
Yeah.
So do you want to dive into this question, or how do you want to do this?
Well, I think before we dive in, just a quick shout out to one of our sponsors today. We are talking all about AG1, which is probably the reason I am not on the ground right now.
Oh, it could be.
That's right.
So AG1, it's an all-in-one nutritional product. It gives you a multivitamin. It gives you some greens. It gives you adaptogens.
Probiotics, prebiotics,
That's
vitamins, minerals.
We love that it's NSF certified, which means for sport, which means that it's got all the stuff that it says it's supposed to have in it, and none of the bad stuff.
Yeah, which honestly is like pretty hard to find in a multivitamin or a green, like any kind of greens powder type thing. So to find something that just kind of has all of these things in one, and you're okay using it. Yeah, like
we also like if you subscribe here using the link
drinkag1.com/MollyH.
Then you get 5 free travel packs, which we love those travel packs. I always say they fit nicely into your skinny jeans. If you wanted to store it in your back pocket, it's probably not advised, but you could.
You could. That's right. Where are your skinny jeans?
I lost them. A man stole them from us.
Oh, that's right. Your one pair of skinny jeans.
One bad day in Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
Not many bad days in Santa Barbara, but that was one.
Yeah, that was early on. That was over a decade ago now, and I'm still bitter about my.
Okay.
Honestly, I could.
You're bitter, but you like AG1.
Bitter, but I like AG1.
Let's wrap up the set. So use the link.
All right, use the link drinkag1.com/MollyH. 5 free travel packs plus year supply of immune supporting vitamin D, and of course the actual big pack of AG1 delivered straight to your door. Super convenient. Keep things simple. Check it out.
Okay, so we have a question that's near and dear to our heart. The topic of this podcast, the ethos of the podcast and our business, I guess, is this idea of like, can you train effectively to perform well in 2 seemingly different goals, right? And we're going to dive into how different are these goals and what are the individual constraints, the individual characteristics of the person that might make it possible or not possible to train for two goals in the same season.
Yeah. So we'll, read this reader question and we'll get into the answer to that. And then I think we'll also kind of broaden it out to really like any kind of 2-goal scenario.
Sure.
Because I do think this is really relevant to a lot of us, right? Like probably if you're listening to this podcast, it's because you
like doing 2 things.
Like doing 2 things.
At least 2.
Yeah.
And we love you for it. That's the idea. This is the consummate athlete. Is sort of the idea is that you're prepared to jump into some of these things. Now, jumping in can be different than winning or being, the World Cup champion
of the world.
Or going to the Olympics, right? There's a pointy end where you start, drifting off and smudging your athletic abilities in one direction, right? And there are trade-offs. So this is what we'll talk a little bit around today. We do often mention a question and then not read it. So let's read this question.
I was going to be like, okay, you need to stop so I can read the question. All right. Can you train for one type of race, but still be fit enough for a completely different type of race in the middle of a group of one type of specific race?
Like a season, we could call it. Yeah.
So I don't just mean show up, but actually be fit enough to be competitive. Also not necessarily peak for one mountain bike race, but be really good for several scattered 3 to 6 weeks apart with a gravel race in the middle. And in the long term, 2 races they would like to be particularly good at would be a 50-mile gravel race that has a ton of climbing. And then a cross country mountain bike race that's usually held 3 months later, so about 12 weeks. So they realize they're not talking about, one 12-week plan, but several different 12-week plans stacked. But with the goals they've outlined, they're not sure if this is possible. So that's a lot of things. And
so yeah, and this is coming off of our 3-month made for you plan, which is a good way to go about this, is to get a plan built around your schedule, right? Because you're probably not just preparing. If you just got a plan like 3 months, as we make, 3 months to the most recent one we did was like a Fondor charity ride race. So that's available. If you use the code CA25, you can get 25% off any of the codes in the Consummate Athlete store.
Any of the plans in the Consummate.
But that plan, usually there'll be like a couple mentions of, you could insert a hard group ride or a B or C priority race, like a practice race midway through those 12 weeks. But a lot of times it's a very linear, in 12 weeks, you're going to do the Ride to Conquer Cancer. Here's 12 weeks of training to get you ready for that. But the reality for a lot of us is that we're going to do a gravel race, and then maybe you're doing a 10K run, and then, oh, I'm going to compete in powerlifting, and then, I'm going to do this gravel race. That's my big race for the season.
I'm sorry, who's that the reality for?
I don't know. There's some wild folks out there. The plan I just made didn't have the powerlifting part, but it was a 10K run, some sort of road crit type event, and then a gravel race. And so I end up doing a lot of those where it's, a little diverse like this.
Yeah. So on that note, 3-month custom made for you training plans. You can head over to consummateathlete.com and check them out if you do kind of have this wacky, wild goal situation, or you're just kind of kicking the tires on training plans in general. But right. Okay, so how do you answer this question? And I think what I really like about it is like nothing in this is spectacularly outside the realm of possibility, right? We're talking about sort of let's talk the acute and then maybe the chronic, where the acute is, okay, they're about to come into a 3 to 6 week mountain bike season where they want to drop a gravel race in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Was that the gap? Yeah, because it's 3 to 6 weeks apart. So that's really not. Sometimes you talk about 6 weeks out. You're 6 weeks out from a race. So if it was 6 weeks apart, I don't see any problem with that.
No. So I think maybe you missed this part. So it's there. I think what they're saying is that there's sort of two questions. The first question is they have, say, 6 mountain bike races spread out over like 6 weeks, and there's a gravel race in the middle of that.
Oh, okay.
And then the second question is next year, so almost a year from now.
Oh, okay.
They really want to do well at this gravel race, 50-mile gravel race that has a lot of climbing in March. And then in early June, be ready for this big cross-country mountain bike race. That's like is a big deal for them. So let's maybe start with the first question of you're racing most weeks for a few weeks. So you're in mountain bike season. Sure. Can you add in gravel racing?
Well, I don't see these as being that diverse, really, right? So I always think back, Jeff Kabush was, I think maybe the first time he was on, he said something to the effect, because we were asking him, because Uncle Jeff does a lot of this stuff where he's doing, a road race the one week and then short track the next week. And then
we're trying to see how many weeks in a row we can mention Jeff Kabush.
So he said, I think the quote is, if you have endurance and coordination, you can do a lot. And his thing was sort of, what does that mean? You've got to sort of dive into that. But the idea is that we're training for bicycle riding, and a lot of that is what is the type of volume and fitness. This might be the fitness score, your CTL. If you're a fairly fit person, then you have fitness, like you can pedal a bicycle, and the bicycle could look a bunch of different ways, but at some point it's set up similarly, and bicycle races all sort of take a certain form. Now, and then the coordination pieces, can you execute you could call them fundamental skills? Are you balanced on your bike? Can you corner really well? Do you ride a bunch of different bikes? So this is the coordination piece. Probably there's a pedaling aspect to that. But I think if that's true, then that's where you see something like we would point to examples of Vanderpool, or, these phenoms, Mariana Voss, who are, Katarina Nash, who are just very good. If they put them on a bike, they're probably towards the front of the race, right?
It's true.
And we probably have examples of this, in our friends or our, the local community. There's probably people that can win a track race, and they can win a cyclocross race, and they can win a mountain bike race, and,
And yes, you probably hate them, and that's okay.
So there's that. So I think when the engine's there and the experience is there, then you can probably jump into a lot of stuff and do pretty well. Now, the question is, if you're planning to win or really push what, your normal is, you're going for a personal best, you're going for like the best of, you're trying to beat your 20-year-old self, then that's where sometimes these focusing down can be important, especially when the race is getting outside of the norm. So if you're doing something like Unbound gravel, where that's 200 miles of gravel, that's a lot different than a 90-minute mountain bike race. I've seen people do those things in this format, 6 weeks and then Unbound somehow sprinkled in there.
Yeah, it's funny that when we talked about this question the other day, we were actually thinking about if you look at even the Lifetime Grand Prix, a lot of more of the mountain bike focused athletes will skip Unbound, while a lot
not do very well, yeah,
or just not do very well. But a lot, and then a lot of the more gravel road guys will skip one of the shorter mountain bike races. So, at the point, this I guess maybe gets to your point about the pointy end. When you are kind of getting up there, you are kind of picking and choosing a little bit.
Well, and the strain of those longer races, something like Unbound or a solo 24-hour race, I like to see a fair bit of focus into those because they're pretty specific and the recovery demands are a lot. I always think back to that post of Linda Wallenfels, of sort of it's like 6-7 weeks potentially coming off of some of these solo big massive adventures if you're pushing really hard in them, right, and going deep in them, which again in this scenario you might be. So I think when they're similar, again, the question was, an XC race, which might be, somewhere between 90 minutes or 75 minutes and an hour 20 to maybe up to 3 hours even for, a traditional XC race, if we can call it that. And then your 80, what is it, 50 miles of gravel really isn't likely a ton, even with that amount of climbing. The wind times on that's probably going to be 2 hours, sorry, 3 hours. We have 100K with about that amount of climbing around here, and the wind time's always around 3 hours. It's, again, the terrain matters, but that would be it. So I don't see those being hugely different. You could do those back-to-back weekends. The challenge for everyone is, how much can you train on each bike? And you are going to end up splitting the time probably. Can you do intervals on your mountain bike or intervals on your gravel bike? That's going to be the challenge to have is, can you be prepared technically, tactically, mechanically? Do you own the two different bicycles? These are some of the things that come up, but I don't see something like that. That's a pretty narrow, or if we were thinking of bike racing on a spectrum from maybe like a track sprint race up to bike packing for 15 days, right across, whatever it takes to go across Africa or something, right? Like something like that, like really touring. Those two things, like track race sprinting and then that, but even I'm just, as I say that, I mean, it's like Ashton Lambie,
I was just gonna say, I was thinking that
his world record was at like 4 minutes or something.
Yeah, sub 4 minutes.
And then he got really into super long bike packing.
He was actually into super long bike packing before he got on the track.
So he built the engine, right? So I don't see a huge problem with it. It's sort of should be fine. I don't see a huge problem with it.
No, I think the problem comes, and actually like rereading this, the nice thing is like a lot of these are spread, fairly far apart. Also, I actually really like the idea of the gravel race earlier in the year and then transitioning to mountain biking, because often, most of us live in climates where the trails are not accessible. So actually like going from the trainer into gravel makes a lot more sense to me than trainer into mountain bike.
And we're in Paris to Ancaster week as we're recording this. I guess this will be maybe the week after Paris to Ancaster or two. I don't know what our planned release time is, but that's that spring classic here in Ontario. We just had Barrie Roubaix in the US. And there's a lot of these spring classics where, the mountain bike trails typically aren't ready or in great shape. It's April, so we get those out, and a lot of mountain bikers will do that and then go race mountain biking into May, June. And so that's very, very common. That's how we always used to do it. There's sometimes an earlier mountain bike race just before Paris to Ancaster, but that was sort of hit or miss. But that one was actually a time trial, so it was sort of an interesting way to start.
So I do think in this case, like you're right, it does make sense. You can probably be as competitive as you want in both of these, where you have kind of a tighter, they're much more similar. But one thing we talked about sort of before, as we were talking through this question, is, I mean, there was a year we drove out west so you could race mountain bike nationals in Canmore, Alberta, and then we kept driving further west. So we could race Ironman the next weekend.
Yeah, so a little diverse there because there's swimming, running, and time trial-ish, triathlon bike riding. right after a mountain bike race. Now, again, this gets to where there's this sort of the race demands, and then there's also the individual constraints or characteristics. And so within that, there would be the goals of the athlete that we'd want to consider. Am I trying to win mountain bike nationals for the first time? As a 30, whatever I was at the time, 35, 34-year-old, that would be extraordinary, right? I'd have to quit my job, get all these like personal trainers and stuff and, a full pit team, maybe invest a couple $100,000. Maybe I could do it.
I would have popped your wheel, slashed your tires on the last rock.
Your wheel, man.
I was trying to think of how to slash the tires. That was the word I was looking for. Sorry.
That doesn't sound great at all. Or it was more sort of, I was doing, par for the course. I say minimum expectation is usually how I say when I cross the line. I guess I got the minimum expectation at the mountain bike race. And then at the Ironman, there really was no expectation. I wanted to do okay, but it was really just, okay, can you not drown and then ride your bike for a while and, run a marathon, or a walk. And I wasn't really that stressed about it. So none of the stuff was really lighting the world on fire. We had trained for a full year for the Ironman. And again, the mountain bike race was sort of incidental. And I did pretty well at it. I think it went okay, but it wasn't, I wasn't building, my expectation was not high for really either of them. And my training, getting back to that, like I had the endurance and the capacity to do almost all of it. It was really just the swim at the Ironman that was the hectic bit. So yeah, that was like a really dense but really diverse one. But you can see how the personal characteristics, where I had done lots of biking and mountain biking and many nationals over the years, made that so it was possible, right? And the goals and the expectations I had set were in line with that. But you can see how if I was like, I need to turn pro at Ironman, then the mountain bike thing could not have happened. Like that would just be non-negotiable, I don't think.
Yeah. And I mean, again, coming into that, even a year before, the swim was really the only thing you needed to learn. Like, yes, you needed to get, the longer durations on the bike.
The finish, right? Like I didn't even really have a goal finish time. We had a rough idea based on, but it wasn't like I was, under 10 hours or else we're quitting or something.
To be fair, his finish time was atrociously good. It was very annoying.
Well, it wasn't, but not on the scale of, professional men in Ironman. So
no, but you did have like the second fastest bike on the course out of
beat by at least one of the pro women though, which is super impressive. They're so fast. But yeah, so that was the idea, is that the goal wasn't so ambitious. So if we get back to the listener question, they said these are their 2A races and they really want to go at them. And so what I would look at is, what is the experience of the athlete at the gravel race? Is it a gravel race? It's a gravel race. And then like not even like an XCO race, I think is the other one. And I believe they've done both of these before. So they're familiar, they know what a gravel bike is, they know how to set up tires, that sort of thing. So a lot of the mechanical, the technical, the tactical is there. Then it's just really, is this the year that you're going to win the age group or win? And I think whenever we're starting to think win bests, really push the limits, that's where I like the slack. I like it to be the same bike and a little more familiar, and where I might choose to maybe enter another mountain bike race, even if it was just the weekly race series, to be just so sharp and so good on that type of racing. Especially because a lot of us don't have, a Jeff Kabush type background where it's like bikes whole life, super elite level, and just genetics as well, right? That have like kept that engine going, right. and all day to train and prepare and work on tires and tactical stuff, right? So it's just the multiple bikes and the different training. I just would prefer it to be specific. If the goal is like, this is the year I'm 50 in my 50 to 55-year-old class, and I am going to smash this and get the jersey or whatever it is.
No, that's the gravel race that they're talking about. We actually know people who do that race on mountain bikes. It is 50 miles. The race has.
Which race are you talking about?
The gravel race they're talking about.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Like it's in the South. We weren't going to talk about the name of the gravel race.
I didn't say the name of the gravel race. I just said we know people that have done it on mountain bikes. Okay. I've done it.
Okay.
I probably would have done it on a mountain bike.
Okay. Yeah, and that's it. Like it's pedaling bikes. It's maybe a good load. So I think that's part of it, right? Is racing. Sometimes it's the best race you can get close to your home.
Yeah. So in that case, that race may no longer be one of the competitive races for you. That race might be more of just, getting some early season start line experience and just enjoying it. I don't know if this person lives near there and it's more of a community.
I think these situation. Are relatively close. Yeah. Which is great. I love that factor too, because we've taken the travel a bit out of it. It's that Ironman example, like we were traveling across the country, and that's where if one of those races was super important, like the extra bike and the equipment is just like a train wreck in that scenario, especially with triathlon. It just wouldn't have made sense. Like you would go directly, towards the venue, reduce the travel time and that sort of stuff. Whereas this is from home, so you have your garage. It's easier with the tech, and you could probably go to your shop if you need to get help. I was just thinking of another example. Oh, to your point, if these races were back-to-back weekends, say, but sometimes I'll see, something like a road stage race, which could be like a big gravel race where there's like a big dose of stress. The Green Mountains one that often comes, the week before something like we have our provincials or like a state championship. And so I've seen a few athletes, and I've actually done this, where you do Green Mountain, 4 days of road racing, huge dose of training stress, racing stress. Then you sort of have the super compensation. You're hoping you don't get sick or injured or tired. And then the next weekend, I don't know if that was the first time I won provincials, but it was a really good provincials that next weekend.
It's a gamble for sure, but
So you race Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then your provincials in this case would have been like the Sunday after. And so that's like a super compensation, but very hectic. Like that was a time in my life where I had a lot of space to, have the two bikes and get the
right.
travel and do the pre-ride and all that stuff. So that again, like that's another way to think about it, is like there's this big training or racing stimulus dose that then can really bump your fitness into the next week, or it can make you sick or tired or injured. So
For sure.
there is pros and cons or risk and reward there.
Yeah. It's funny. I realize I am a train wreck when it comes to this question.
Yeah.
Like this reminds me of the year that I kind of accidentally ended up on a road racing team.
Crit racing team, not just road racing. You could probably be a road racer, but a crit racer is a bad choice.
Yeah. Terrible crit racer. Just appallingly bad.
Cornering and high speed skill. Yeah, like the cadence is
Look, my sprint is fantastic.
As long as you can wind it up.
Yeah. If I can wind it up, we're great.
It's like trying to accelerate your car when you're in fifth gear and just like really stomping that mat.
All right, look, I once won a preem in the pro race at the Tour of Somerville. All right.
Okay. So why are you a train wreck though?
Okay, because I'm terrible at this. I don't actually train for the goals I've set in those cases. So I guess my cautionary thing is like, when you're asking this question, clearly this person has it figured out. Like they have kind of this really reasonable plan. It makes sense.
I think it's great. Yeah.
I think it's great.
And they're getting a plan from a really great coach.
That's it. But I mean, I am not alone in this of the FOMO, basically, right? A friend called and said, like, hey, I'm doing this road team. Like, do you want to be on it?
Right.
Of course I want to be on it. I'm being asked to be on something. Granted, I had just come off a season where we were managing a cyclocross team and I was in the middle of yoga teacher training. And yes, I drove overnight to Massachusetts one day so I could race a crit and then do team photos and then drive back for the yoga teacher training in the middle of the night.
Right.
And that was when I also was teaching yoga and had to drive back in the middle of the night to teach yoga.
Again, this is the person, right? When we're in our, I don't know if you're in your 20s at that point. I
was not in my 20s.
Let's say you were. So you can hustle, and sometimes you have to go and you're in different communities, and that's okay. But I think as we get older, which is a lot of our listeners, myself included, where sometimes that's where that slack piece is. We just know that life's gonna get in the way, so we try and not overbook it and try and make it as seamless. That's one of Dan John's intervention intake questions is, are you okay if it's seamless? And what he's saying by that is like, are you going to be okay if we leave slack for this to be, a good in 2 years, you're going to do this race so that we have lots of runway for this to be seamless is what he calls that. And I think that's a great way to look at it as an adult athlete is to try and pick those ones that are the bigger ones. And then the other ones might just get sprinkled in, which, sometimes makes me nervous, but it might just be like, yep, this weekend, it looks like I have a clear runway to race. And this is a practice race, right?
Should have pointed out the year I did the crit team was the year I decided to start ultra running. So that had been the A goal.
Right. And then you were pulled away.
And then I added the crit team. I mean, actually, so this is the dumb part though. I wasn't pulled away from it. I stayed fully focused on training for ultra running and then would show up at bike races.
Right.
And thank God I have some background in bike racing so I didn't embarrass myself or wreck the team or anything.
It might be a good example of you did go to them. So it really depends what was the expectation and the goal. And I don't think you had you just didn't want to necessarily continue doing it. But for the season, I don't think you were like, oh, I wish I had won the crit race or, something like that.
Oh, I let out teammates and stuff. I actually wasn't terrible, except for the couple crits where I was definitely terrible.
So it does, this is, sometimes clients laugh at me because I have these sayings, but like it depends what the goal is, right? Like if that's the goal is to just show up and do what you can,
Mission
maybe be a
accomplished.
teammate, then that's great, right? And if that aligns with the team's expectations of you, I guess that's okay too. But then again, this year you have this big goal at Leadville that is a huge stretch goal and is going to take a lot. So then it is caution that you don't join a crit race. You haven't, we've had 2 mountain bike rides together.
Personal
thanks
best,
to
actually.
great friends in Brevard that pulled you out on a 2 mountain bike rides. But there, may only be another 2 bike rides between, we're in almost May and all the way to August, right? There might only be 2, 3 more bike rides potentially because of that focus.
Exactly, yeah. And that's it's sort of a bummer sometimes, but that's the thing.
And the other events, you are entered in other events, which is probably at this point in your life you almost wouldn't enter events, but you've done 1 run race, you have another run race sort of with friends. It's low key, but it's a run race. Are you doing any other run races or maybe?
Yeah, a couple local ones, but nothing.
Okay, so
nothing
just
big.
In line with that, on a start line on your foot, no bike.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and as always, we're just going to kind of bring this back to the scheduling out your season. And, for me, Leadville's a huge stretch, yes, but it's also a huge time commitment and travel commitment and stuff. So I didn't sign up for a ton of races this summer because I don't really like racing a ton. I like racing. I don't like racing every single weekend.
Right.
But also because you wanted to race a fair bit this summer. And I don't really I don't enjoy when we're kind of trying to do 2 separate races and
sure.
We use 1 car. We're very eco-friendly like that. Right. Or lazy because we don't really want to bother getting another car. But at any rate, it would be a huge pain in the butt if I wanted to do a bunch of other races. I think
though too, there's a piece that's sort of like the Unbound. Like if we were sticking to bikes, the challenge you're taking on is sort of like an Unbound or a Leadville bike, where it's sort of so far off in this other dimension that the other, if you were doing a mountain bike race or something. It's not that it doesn't fit, but it is like I always hesitate because you're giving up some of that more specific, training. And sometimes I'm like, okay, well, racing is pretty specific. Usually there are start lines, but with some of these things, they're so off in that other side. Like, it's not like you're gunning for position in really either of those races, right? There's maybe a little bit of pack riding, but for most people, it's a pretty solo journey, and it's very much, can you put food in your mouth and keep yourself happy and pace appropriately and so forth. So that's, I think, when these goals get pushed out. But this question that we've been going around today, to me, that's like, if you're under that 3 hours, they both look like off-road bicycles. I don't see a whole lot of problem with that. I think that's a great summer.
For sure. And then last note really is just, no matter how disparate your goals are, if you have a couple goals, it honestly is always a good idea to chat with a coach. And this is why we have options ranging from the, daily, monthly, weekly level coaching, but also, training plans, the custom training plans, and just the booking a phone consult.
Sure.
Because I think the phone consult actually is maybe the most valuable thing here is just talking through the general
and sometimes
plan.
When folks have really wild summers planned, the phone consults can be better because sometimes these wild summers involve just so much travel and adventures and races every weekend. It's more talking through well, how are you going to manage this? Maybe what are some, we could call them hacks or things that you're going to try and fit in there. I'm thinking of one, sounds like a great adventure, but tons of tours and business, they have a business around sort of tours. So it's taken up weeks and weeks and weeks. And then also a Leadville bike, but the tours I think are more running, if I recall. And there's just a lot going on. But that was a great phone consult where we sort of just talked through what are some ways to try and make this go better given this is happening. I've signed myself up for this. Please help. Tell me it'll be okay. And sometimes I'm like, it'll
be.
It'll be okay. It'll be okay. But that's that. And I think on top of that, before even that, I think the laying it out in the calendar, when you're thinking, is this possible? We do like that, whether it's a digital, a Training Peaks calendar, a Google calendar. I really think that family, real estate calendar that they drop off on your front door are used to. Sometimes is the best way to just highlight, I'm away for this week for Leadville, and then count back the number of weeks. And does this look reasonable, or does it look like you're traveling from like Leadville to France and then here? Like, I haven't been home in 17 weeks.
But at the time, it seemed totally reasonable because it actually is only like 4 events, but then somehow like the travel and everything makes it so that, yeah, it all kind of ends up blending, which is something that we've been super guilty of. So this is absolutely like stuff that we've had to learn over the years. And I mean, you're right. I think the physical calendar, especially, and I guess like we're kind of speaking at it from we both race kind of situation, but I do think the physical calendar when you have a family is actually like the really big one, because how many people do you have that have put races on the calendar only to realize it's their daughter's huge recital, or
This is our stereotypical, yeah.
Their spouse has like a huge like
vacation,
vacations booked, or like your spouse has a huge work trip that they're going to be gone that weekend. Sure. So now it's a whole thing. So I think really having that physical calendar helps put everything into perspective, not just the racing.
And I do like, this question has what was it? It was like May, June is sort of the main 2A races we're talking around. I like that because it's dense, right? And then you could say to your family, I'll be around. I won't do races in July, August. I have a lot of clients that do something like that, right? Or whenever I won't race cyclocross September, October, November. So I'm around all the fall. And our season's sort of split like that, where mine's more front loaded, and then I don't really have anything after mountain bike nationals. Not that I won't do anything, but we haven't thought about the fall and cyclocross. We haven't, certainly I don't have anything in August. So, just trying to plan that out so that we have, it's makes sense, right? It works.
Yeah. Okay, well, hopefully that ramble gave everyone a bit of food for thought when it comes to disparate goals. Oh, actually, maybe one final thought on this. We talked about goals that are sort of in the same line in terms of like they're all endurance sport, but what if, and I guess it's maybe still an endurance sport, but like where do you fit in something like, a paddleboard race or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would group that as like an off-season activity. It certainly could be in the middle of your season, and again, you would just try and sprinkle that through the week if that was something, the challenge you're taking on, right? No different than how I had swimming integrated into my mountain bike nationals prep the year we did Ironman. You just have to find time for that, but you are giving up a bit of time, especially if you're going to train for paddleboard. And lots of people do paddleboarding, for recovery and, just to be I call that like normal person activity, right? If you're just going out and like you go out and take pictures of your small dog on your paddleboard and like sunbathe or something, that's
whoa.
That's like a recovery modality. Athletes. But these people who have, the racing canoe, kayak, paddle boards, and they're out there just like paddling, this is a different, those are athletes. People go to the Olympics for that stuff, right? So it is to your point. So you might do a season of that, but then I would, if that's, you're trying to win Masters Nationals in paddleboarding, then I said that as if it was not, that's a big deal. I didn't mean to say that as if it wasn't a big deal. If you are trying to win Masters Nationals in a paddleboard, then give that a season, right? But that might be I don't know when that's probably the summer. And so maybe you race more like spring, like this person, right? Like May, June, and then you get into your paddle boarding and, you could certainly maintain it and then really drive hard into that summer. That's how I would probably look at that.
Love it. All right. Well, if you have any questions, hit us up over at consummateathlete.com, at Consummate Athlete on Instagram, and do us a huge favor, rate, review, share with a friend, all that fun stuff. You know the drill. Super helpful. Might get me a second dachshund eventually. So yeah, we appreciate you, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.